First of all, the key ask that we've been sharing for COP26 on ambition is that every country needs to come forwards with an enhanced nationally determined contribution by September. And every country needs to come forwards with an ambitious long-term strategy before COP26 that sets out a pathway to net zero. I'd just like to say that we're aware that ambition as a term can mean different things to different audiences. So it can mean ambition for mitigation, ambition for adaptation, and ambition for support. And we welcome ambition on all three, but our focus, in line with the mitigation focus on NDCs, is that mitigation and ambition means increased emissions reductions targets in the NDCs. So that's not to say that we don't value or welcome ambition on adaptation or support, but it's very much that the focus is on the mitigation element. And I'm aware that this will mean that you, as sort of officers who work on Africa, will be looking at this jointly, so looking at the co-benefits of mitigation and adaptation. So the why on why we're setting this out to be the key objective for COP26. We are on target to reach a pathway of 2.7 to 3.4 degrees of warming, and compared with what the current set of NDCs give us, we need a plan for emissions reductions that are 3 times greater to stay at 2 degrees and 5 times greater to ensure that we reach that Paris temperature goal. So it's also important to recognise that obviously this will come through as quite a challenging ask, and to reiterate that this is not something that the UK is communicating, but we need to lobby countries to make it on these commitments and to act in line with what science is telling us. And for long-term strategies, the link is that we need to meet the long-term temperature goal to balance sources and sinks in the second half of the century, and that requires within these long-term strategies for us to set pathways that will allow us to reach net zero. So that doesn't necessarily mean that for all countries to reach net zero by 2050, but it is about sort of building that momentum towards reaching net zero. And just to add that the NDCs will link to the long-term goals that will relate to how African countries are looking to decarbonise from now until 2050. So a good NDC will set itself up to deliver on a long-term strategy and make that credible. To show why this is so important for 2020, if you can see, this is the Paris Agreement ambition cycle. So it's about ratcheting the mechanism and providing a political platform to put that spotlight on countries to make sure that their commitments are being monitored and the recommendations are being made on how countries can increase their ambition. So again, this cycle is focused on NDCs, which is why it's so important that every country comes forward this year by September to demonstrate that the mechanism is working, because this is the first point where NDCs will come forwards following the Paris Agreement. So this is to show that the mechanism is working, and the reason why every country needs to come forwards, and the African countries will have a key role to play in that, is because they will put pressure on the major emitters who are looking to do everything they can to deflect from doing this. And also to note that although we have 2 asks in this cycle, there is no further hook for long-term strategies to be submitted. So once they're submitted in 2020, there's no way of revising them or looking at how technology costs are falling, and countries could look at how they could go further and faster. So this is why it's important that all countries come forwards with NDCs, but also important to encourage all countries to come forwards with long-term strategies so that we have the ability to create that legacy to take things forwards from COP26 and from the Paris Agreement. Just to underline that the reason why 2020 is so important is because this is where all countries will set out their baseline for 2030. So what they will do over the next decade will be incredibly important in determining whether we can reach that Paris Agreement goal. So that's why we're pushing, because if it doesn't come forwards this year, nothing will come forwards until 2025. And again, the science is telling us that could be too late. So this is a bit hectic, and I'm not going to go into this slide too much because due to COVID-19, we're sort of reevaluating how this works for the year, but just to outline that we have 3 key moments that we're looking at. So these are the Placencia Ambition Forum, where the Alliance of the Small Island States would host an event at the beginning of the year. This is to, again, set out this strategy of all countries putting pressure on the major emitters. So we thought this would be a good way to start off, making sure that the most vulnerable countries have a voice. Then you'd move on to CHOGM as the sort of midpoint in advance of where we want NDCs and most long-term strategies to come in. And this would have been one of the key points where we would consider where the UK NDC would be published. It's also a key sort of leader level platform. So again, we wanted to consider that alongside the Africa Regional Climate Week as a way to showcase good practice that's happened so far in the NDCs, the work that countries in the African region have been doing to enhance or to prepare to enhance their NDC. And then CHOGM could have been a moment where we could have lots of countries in the region come forwards. There will be a focus on the adaptation element, the support that's available. So we were thinking about how we can ensure that there is an offer as well as a good platform for African countries. And then the final point would have been UNGA and the New York Climate Week, where the UN SecGen has committed to doing a ambition stocktake, which could look at NDCs, and we were hoping to shape that with the office of the UN SecGen. So given that we're in this COVID-19 state of uncertainty, we're still looking at how we can make these events workable in a more virtual space. So it's not to say that this isn't still the strategy for the year, but there is some rethinking on what we can do, given that some events may be postponed, some may be cancelled, but the ask and the need for countries to come forwards with their NDCs in 2020 still remains. Just wanted to say that the reason why we've set the deadline of September is because in advance of COP, we would need to prepare an NDC synthesis report that looks at how far the NDCs have gone to addressing the gap. And obviously, in order to do that, we would need to ensure all NDCs come in advance. So that's the reason for the September deadline. But if you are aware of any countries that are likely to come forwards, please do flag that to us. If you are aware of countries that aren't particularly ambitious, please also flag that to us, and we can share products that outline sort of guidance that outlines what a good NDC will look like to help you in your engagements. And I think other colleagues will step in and talk on the support available.